Okay, good evening and welcome. This is the February 22nd, 2021 regularly scheduled East Long Meadow School Committee meeting. Call the meeting to order 6 o'clock. This meeting is being held remotely in accordance with the Governor of Massachusetts March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law. We do have the full committee in attendance this evening. And we will start with our first order of business, which are approval of minutes. If I could have a motion, please.
Move to approve the February 1st, 2021 executive session meeting minutes.
Motion made by Bill.
I'll second.
Second by Sarah. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. That motion carries 5-0. And one more, please.
Move to approve the February 1st, 2021 regular session meeting minutes.
Okay, I have a motion on the floor. I'll have a second.
I'll second.
Second by Beth. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, nay. That motion carries 5-0 as well. Thank you. We will now move on. We have an opportunity for visitors to address the committee as we do every meeting. This is your chance. If you are logged into our Zoom meeting and you'd like to speak, this would be your opportunity to do so. And if you'd like to, please raise your hand now. Mr. Mackey, if you want to bring in Mr. Harding, please.
Yep, he's on his way.
Thank you, sir. John, you can go ahead. You're on mute whenever you're ready. You can take it off.
Hey, good evening, all. Just signing the wife's birthday card. Hey, in any event, I on behalf of the group, the Parents for In-Person Learning, they wanted, somebody to ask a couple questions tonight. So I figured I'd pose just two quick questions. First, thank you for all your dedication and the work you're doing for all our kids in the community. The first question, essentially, with the number of cases decreasing, positive cases decreasing, and with the vaccinations increasing, and nearby towns increasing their in-person learning or returning to full in-person learning, have you considered moving to possibly two cohorts, one with a full-time in-person learning and one with full-time remote, possibly asking parents and students to make a greater commitment to one or the other so that we can make things easier on teachers? That's the first question. And the second question, very quickly, is, has there been any discussion on purchasing or asking businesses to donate the portable trifolds so that we can possibly better mitigate transmission in the classrooms? So with those two questions, thank you again for everything that you guys do.
Okay, John, thanks. We're going to, we'll touch on some of these topics later on today, but certainly appreciate you checking in with the questions.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Frank.
Okay. Happy birthday to your wife.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, you bet. Okay, seeing no further hands, we will move forward with our agenda. This would be the chance for the committee or any subcommittee communications. Does anyone have anything this evening they'd like to discuss? No? Everybody's good? Okay. Moving right along. We have discussion on the floating season for sports here at the high school. This would include football, track, and cheerleading. I believe we have a couple of guests for this topic.
We do. We have Mr. McGee, our athletic director, and Mr. Page, principal of the high school. And just as you said, it's taking a look at this floating season that is basically going to run from now until April to handle a few of these sports that didn't get to compete back in the fall. Mr. McGee, do you want to, or Mr. Page, do you want to share your screen so we can go through the presentation?
Mr. McGee, you want me to take that one?
Sure, if you want to share your screen and I'll go through it if that works for you.
All right, just give me a second to get it pulled up.
Yeah, so while Mr. Page is pulling that up, this is the first time ever that there's a fourth season during the academic year. So in the past, there's always been 3 seasons. So this is the first time that there'll be a fourth season. The timeline for this season is going to be March 1st to April 25th. So it would start next Monday. We are wrapping up our winter sports this week. They've been going really well. The parents and athletes, the coaches, the referees, it's been a really smooth winter. And the athletes and coaches and parents get all the credit for that. This next season that we're looking for approval for, facial coverings would be worn at all times, excluding mask breaks while social distancing. All personal items will remain in the athlete's bag, and athletes will bring their own water and hand sanitizer. There will be limited shared equipment, and sanitizing breaks will occur based on each sport's guidelines. There will be limited spectators. There will be limited use of locker rooms. Competitions will be limited within geographic bubbles. So it would look very similar to the past fall season and also the past winter season. The 3 sports that we're looking at are football, indoor track, and cheerleading. Football was postponed from the fall season. Indoor track was postponed from the winter, and cheerleading was also postponed from the fall. I do want to note that we are still on track to have our April season, our spring season, which would be April 26th and potentially ending July 1st. So all of our spring sports plus wrestling, we're still looking to start April 26th. But for tonight, we're talking about these 3 sports. So if we take a closer look at football, football is designated by the EEA as a higher risk sport. Team rosters for game day competition cannot exceed 45 players and a maximum of 6 coaches. So these are all the MIA modifications for football, the big ones that I wanted to go over. During huddles, there must be spacing between players and they should be facing the same direction. There would be mandatory water breaks at the halfway point of each quarter, around the 6-minute mark. Timeouts would be extended to 2 minutes. Half times would be 10 minutes, but will occur outside. They would not be going into the locker room. And there would be severe limitations on full contact practices. So full contact would only be allowed in no more than 2 practices per week and no more than 15 minutes per day. All equipment would be disinfected at the end of each practice. And only level 1 practices would be allowed indoors. And just to review, level 1 practice is non-contact workouts, conditioning, individual skill work, and drills. If you take a closer look at track and field, this would be considered indoor track. And track is designated by the EEA as a lower risk sport. The competitions would most likely be held outdoors using the indoor track distances. And we're fairly certain, we had an athletic director meeting today, that indoor track facilities will be closed during that season. So the meets would occur outdoors. All meets would be dual meets. There'd be different time slots provided to each team for warm-ups. Sprinting and hurdle events, every other lane would be used. So for example, 4 athletes would be the maximum per heat on an 8-lane track. Longer distances would have staggered starts, and batons, implements, bars, and mats would be disinfected between participants' use. The 3rd sport we're going to talk about tonight is cheerleading. So for the competitive cheer, it is considered a higher risk sport. Mats would be cleaned each day of activity. Cheer teams would perform for home games only. Cohort stunt groups must be created of athletes of no more than 10. This is also the maximum size of any stunt group that can compete or perform. Stunt groups should be kept together in their cohort. Mixing and matching bases and flyers from groups must be avoided. And during indoor practices, normal speaking voices should be used, and elevated voice projection is only permitted outside. And teams would be limited to a maximum of 20 cheerleaders in attendance at any outdoor event. So those are all of the MIA modifications for those 3 sports. Just to review the spectators, similar to the fall and the winter, the Massachusetts EEA Outdoor Competition Spectator Guidelines, spectators should be limited to 2 adults, parents or guardians or chaperones, and 2 siblings of the participating player. Per PVIAC guidelines, only the home team spectators should attend games, and away team spectators should watch the athletic event via a live stream. Spectators must wear facial coverings and maintain 6 feet of social distance at all times. Spectators must view the game from designated areas only, and all spectator policies should follow the above guidelines, but school committees can choose to be more strict with those guidelines. And then the last part with this floating season is transportation. So every effort would be made to provide transportation for the high school athletic events. And this past winter, the LPVEC has been outstanding. They've been able to provide yellow buses for all of our winter athletic teams. So that's kind of a review of those three sports. I'm sure that there are probably some questions that I'd be happy to answer.
So Kevin, just in terms of historically for East Meadow High School, our sports programs that have run this year, I would say successfully, but we haven't seen any major transmission issues, health issues. We've been certainly following protocols. I've been to my daughter's basketball games and seen the protocols in action. So just in terms of our experience at the high school, so far it's been a safe experience. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that statement. The winter was extremely smooth. We've had to quarantine 0 teams. And again, the athletes and the coaches have been following all the MIA protocols, and I think that's the reason why.
And then in terms of the protocols and how we notify students and families, do we message out for individuals, say, cheerleading participant, these are the modifications so that the parents know and the students are aware before we even start?
Yes, so there is going to be a coaches meeting on Thursday, so I'll review all of the modifications with the coaches. The coaches will then have some type of Zoom meeting or email communication that will go out to each family. Each family also, when they register their kid on Family ID, are made aware of where to find the modifications. And I can also send out a link to all families so that they can click on that link to view the football, cheerleading, and indoor track modifications. And I'll review it all with the coaches also.
Okay. And just one more question, and I'll certainly open it up to my peers. Wondering if in your meetings with the other athletic directors, if you could just have a discussion about how the certain districts charge for spectators to watch these athletic events. I know here at East Meadow we do not, and I'm thankful for Mr. Mackey and the work he does to provide that for the community, but some communities charge as much as $10 to watch, one of their students play. And I don't know that there's really a cost related to that, more of a exploitation, to charge visiting guests. So wonder just in the future, Kevin, if you could, just bring that subject up. I don't anticipate it to change, but just noticing that as a parent and as a spectator.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And I did bring that up with other athletic directors. The fall was actually really smooth with that because schools allowed us to send a live streamer to the outdoor events. So our booster clubs were awesome. They live streamed the outdoor events. The difference with this winter is other athletic directors would not allow us to send our own live streamer because it was indoors. So I suspect, since football's outdoors and track is outdoors, I suspect that all the athletic directors will allow us to send our own live streamer.
That's great.
But I agree with you. The NFHS network charging $10, $15 to watch was frustrating for me and a lot of families.
Yeah, I think it just puts limitations to this, very unique situation that, come on, we just want to watch our kids' games. There's no need to, knock spectators over the head. But fair enough. Please keep us posted if that'll change for this floating season. Questions from the rest of the board?
Just to follow up on that too, while I have the chance, LCAT has been amazing. They have gone to all of our freshman, JV, varsity home basketball games. They've gone to home and away ice hockey games. I don't think they've missed anything this winter, and the announcers, Jamie videotaping, I've gotten so many compliments from other schools that have been so thankful for LCAT.
I was wondering what the, I know that there was discussion about adjusting the fees, and what are the fees? I'll be honest, I didn't look down to see if you added that for the different sports that are happening.
So I didn't add the fees yet. I think a lot's going to depend on what the schedule looks like. So right now for football, we're hoping to play 6 games, 3 home and 3 away. It might be as small as 4 games, depending on how the weather cooperates. So it's going to be 4 to 6 games. The track and field would most likely be 4 or 5 dual meets, possibly as many as 6. So I wanted to hold off on what I would recommend for the fee until I see the schedules,
Okay.
and also to see how the weather is going, because charging from the referee costs, the transportation costs, those could be on the lower side or they could be a little bit higher. I would suspect that I would recommend somewhere between $100 and $149, all depending on how many games we play. So it would be in that range that I would recommend. And then, of course, it's the school committee's decision.
Okay, thank you. It's thoughtful.
And just to double check, so in the past, we've approved cheerleading once before, and we've approved basketball and hockey, and those were all considered higher risk by the MIA at the time of our approval, correct?
So when cheerleading was approved, we only approved level 1 cheerleading, which would be
Okay.
socially distanced cheerleading. But you are correct that ice hockey was a higher risk sport and basketball was also a higher risk sport that we have approved in the past.
And then in terms of team size, would football be the largest roster size falling underneath the higher risk sport category that we would be approving?
It would be the largest roster size. So we would only be able to suit up a maximum of 45 athletes per game. That's an
Okay.
MIA policy. Currently, we have about 48 athletes registered.
Okay.
We would hope to have a varsity team and a JV team. So we would have 2 separate teams, and we would minimize the interaction between that group of 48 to 50 athletes.
Okay.
Smaller cohorts in practice. There would be times when they are all together at games, but we would try to minimize, and we would, the football coaching staff is excellent at documenting attendance, and they would document the attendance of each day with as minimal groups of 48 together as possible.
And would that also represent one of the largest coaching staffs too?
Correct. That would be the
Okay.
largest coaching staff that we have.
Okay. And then would we be, just so that I'm clear, we would be, again, moving forward with like that bubble of teams that we've seen in the past where we're playing those teams in our same general geographic region?
Correct. So it would definitely be a geographic region. The bubble would change slightly with football. And one of the main reasons why it would
Okay.
change slightly was because of competitive balance. In basketball and in soccer, there was a little bit larger gap in the competitive balance, but with football being such a safety issue of hitting the opposing team in size, our bubble would change a little bit, but it would definitely be geographic.
Okay. And this would
we
be,
not be playing. Yep,
sorry,
sorry,
and
we
this
would
would
not be playing Central Mass or Eastern Mass.
okay. And this would be football's, just so I'm clear, only opportunity to play, correct? It's not like with track where we'd be able to offer outdoor track, or with cheer where we were able to offer, like you described, Mr. McGee, level 1 cheer earlier on in the fall. This would be football's only opportunity this academic year.
Correct. This would be football's only opportunity.
Thank you.
If I can chime in here real quick, I represent MASE on the MIAA football committee. I think I've told everybody this numerous times. We spent an enormous amount of time trying to come up with all these modifications as a committee, meeting via Zoom 2 or 3 times a week if necessary, to finally get the board of directors and sports medicine and everybody else on board with trying to get them squeeze this in. And we are aware of what Kevin said, what Sarah said about the weather and everything else, the size of teams and everything. And we kind of felt as a group that this was the best way to safely participate in a sport that has been bounced all over the place due to this unheard of pandemic. So, I mean, I think that we can probably pull it off. I don't see any obstacles, save the weather. I think that's the biggest hurdle we're going to have right now.
Okay, any other questions or concerns? Kevin, we'd look to have a proposed sports fee maybe in 2 weeks. Is that reasonable?
Yep, definitely. I should have all the schedules in 2 weeks.
Okay. With that, if there's no further discussion from the board, I would entertain a motion.
I move to accept the what are we calling this? I'm sorry.
The MIA floating season for football, track, and cheerleading.
MIAA floating season for track, football, and cheerleading as presented this evening.
Excellent, thank you. Motion made by Beth.
Second.
Second by Antonella. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all's in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. That motion carries 5-0. Okay, Mr. McGee, Mr. Page, we'll move forward with the next season. Thank you for all your efforts.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Okay, we are moving forward with the next piece of business. It's a presentation of the equity audit report. Mr. Smith, do you want to kick us off here?
Sure. So we have a subcommittee of our Diversity and Equity Steering Committee that has been working on this presentation for quite some time and are excited to present the results of our equity audit. And I think Mr. Mackey's probably bringing the individuals of the subcommittee in. And as we...
Please ask, they can raise their hands though, please. It'll make it just a lot easier for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Would members of the subcommittee that are presenting tonight just please raise their hand with the Zoom hand raising mechanism? As we get everybody in, what we had planned to do is each of us has a part in the presentation, and we'll, rather than introduce everybody and go through all the names, we're going to be introducing, we have a couple slides that not only introduce people, but also people will introduce themselves as they pick up their part of the presentation. By the way, given that I'm Gordon Smith, I'm the superintendent of schools, and my pronouns are he, his, him. And I believe
Just waiting for
Mr.
Millie
Polk.
and Mr. Ficero. And I think that's it. I will check my list.
Mr. Polk is leading us into this.
I believe
Is
Mr.
he
Polk
here?
is leading us off.
There he is.
So Mr. Polk is going to start.
Mm-hmm.
He's still muted.
How's that?
There you are, sir.
All right. I apologize for the technical difficulties. I appreciate the opportunity to begin this conversation, and we are at the beginning of this journey, so this will be an ongoing conversation. My name is Eddie Polk. My pronouns are he, his, him. I'm a longtime social studies teacher here at the high school in East Longmeadow and former department chair. I'd like to start by thanking all of you for sharing this space to have this very important discussion about equity and inclusion in our schools. There are schools all around the country that are having very similar conversations and doing this work, but it's rarer to find whole districts that are working together, that are committed to this work on a systemic level. So we're sincerely grateful for this opportunity. I'd also like to take a moment to, if you would allow me a brief moment, to share and honor a land acknowledgement. For those who aren't familiar with land acknowledgements, when you're doing work in equity, whether it's a workshop or a training, or in this particular case, having conversations surrounding equity and inclusion, it's important to acknowledge and recognize the indigenous lands on which we work and live. It's a moment for self-reflection for non-indigenous folks, because it's important for us to understand the longstanding history that has brought us to reside on the land that we are on, and seeking to understand our place within that history, especially as we engage in conversations about equity. It's important to begin with the fact that we are meeting on land that the Pecumtuck and Nipmuc First Nations people were stewards of for thousands of years before colonists engaged in forced land removal and genocide. But it's important for us to understand that colonialism is a current ongoing process, and Indigenous people are still here and thriving, and we want to be allies in seeking equity and inclusion for Indigenous folks. So we want to build our mindfulness around the present participation and how we as allies can support Indigenous people with an emphasis on action. So whether it's donating to COVID relief for disproportionately impacted Indigenous populations, or whether it's conversations or getting involved in protecting land rights, historical education and awareness, making sure First Nations people are included in conversations surrounding climate change. It's important for us to stay informed on Indigenous rights and issues to know the best ways we can take action and be allies. So I appreciate you allowing me to have a moment just to kind of share that and acknowledge, have that land acknowledgement. You'll soon hear from many people who are involved in this process. There'll be an introduction of people who were involved in the past couple of years. But I also want to take a moment to discuss 4 individuals. We'll talk about 4 individuals in particular, but some people that we want to keep in our hearts and minds as well. We want to keep in our hearts and minds numerous students and families with marginalized identities who have navigated spaces in the East Longmeadow Public Schools for decades, who may have connected to some individual adults and peers along their journey, but maybe didn't have that experience, or maybe didn't experience that systemic support that every student deserves while they're attending the East Longmeadow Public Schools. Specifically, I want to acknowledge 4 individuals that we owe a tremendous debt to, because they were the real change agents that set us on this path. Ziomara Tennyson, who was a former beloved paraprofessional and long-term sub at the high school. Dr. Hayda Martinez, who was an equity and inclusion consultant that worked with us for over a year. Lyric Dixon, who was a former student and activist who was at the entry-level stages of these conversations. And Victoria Gonzalez Rodriguez, who was also a former student and activist. They're the ones that kind of broke through that barrier and endured and sacrificed greatly, being some of the first to directly challenge the system and the status quo at great cost to themselves and their emotional well-being. But knowing them the way that I do, all 4 of them, I can only hope that they can take some small comfort in knowing that hopefully we won't let their sacrifice go to waste. We owe it to them and so many others before and since to follow through with what they had begun. And that's kind of the framing of why we're here. So Mr. Ficero and I are going to talk about why we had the equity audit. But before Mr. Ficero introduces himself, I can kind of give you a little bit of background. So 4 years ago, a group of students, staff, and families from the East Longmeadow High School arranged meetings with building and district leadership to shed some light on some of the existing systemic inequities and personal indignities and offensive interactions they were experiencing in school. In response to these concerns expressed, an equity and inclusion committee was formed at the high school, and it was made up of staff, students, and administrators. It was in this committee that it was decided that we bring in an independent consultant. Dr. Hayda Martinez was that consultant, and she came in to provide support, gather data, meet in focus groups, and finalize an equity report for the high school, and continue meeting with the committee even after that. And Dr. Martinez spent the remainder of the year meeting with our student, staff, and administrators and completed a report. And a few of the recommendations that were in that report included improved lines of communication among all stakeholders, inclusion of student voice and leadership, and the formation of a district-wide equity committee. Now, in response to these concerns expressed in the report and the recommendations of Dr. Martinez, and honestly, just as a measure of good practice that every school and district should really consider, the District Equity Committee was formed. And this committee was made up of various stakeholders, and we agreed that an equity audit would be the most sensible way to assess, analyze, and reflect upon our equity efficacy as a district. And for this task, we hired the Center for Leadership and Educational Equity, CLE, who you'll hear quite a bit about, that helped us put this report together. They were hired to assist us in this process. We had also formed partnerships with the National Conference on Community and Justice, known as the NCCJ, who has since worked with our staff and PD, student focus groups, staff and student training, and students in the Bridges program, as well as staff. As I said, we're at the very, very beginning stages of a very important journey, and we've done a lot of work, but it's still just the beginning, and it is a journey. In East Long Meadow Public Schools, ultimately, what we would all, I think, like to have is to exist in a school system where equity and excellence are the norm, but bringing about meaningful, lasting change takes time, energy, and stamina. And this shared purpose of the pursuit of equity for all unites us in the service to all of our students, or for all of our students. So we must continue to learn from our experiences, get comfortable being uncomfortable, and stay engaged in regular conversations about race, equity, and inclusion. It's that day-to-day work in our district and our schools, our community, and especially in our classrooms, by those who have deep, meaningful relationships and a deep, direct impact on our students that will make this vision a reality. So our goal is to take what we learned from this comprehensive equity audit, implement action steps that we see as opportunities to begin a journey for creating a safe, nurturing, equitable space for all students to navigate. And that is ultimately why we did this equity audit. Mr. Fitzgerald will talk about some of the processes and procedures that went along.
Thank you, Eddie. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all. I am Rich Fitzgerald. My pronouns are he, his, and him, and I'm a former school committee member and a proud member of this committee. My role is to follow Mr. Polk, who was extremely effective and far-reaching his introduction, is just to present a very small piece or a very small part of an overview of the audit. Now, a couple of facts. The audit was 2 years in the making, and this audit includes data, findings, and recommendations that will guide us, the East Long Meadow Public Schools, to do the best we can for each and every student. And the audit was compiled reviewing existing data, policies, documents, staff surveys, site visits, and focus groups. So please understand it was quite extensive. In addition, we wish to emphasize a collaborative effort. Mr. Polk has already referenced the organization we work with, the Center for Leadership and Education Equity, CLE. And this organization, plus 21 original stakeholders from the East Long Meadow school system and the community, spearheaded this effort. Now, the committee, quite comprehensive, included administration, students, parents, staff, school committee members, central office, and community, all of them represented. And as we progress through this 2-year process, 9 new members joined us. So once again, we emphasize that this is a collaborative effort to look deep into our educational system to envision where improvements can be made. So this audit is a shared vision. And the shared vision is to bring about effective change for the betterment of all the constituents of the East Long Meadow school system, especially our students. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fitzgerald and Mr. Polk. Thank you so much for starting us off with a really comprehensive introduction. As I said earlier, I'm Gordon Smith. I'm the superintendent of schools. My pronouns are he, his, him. And just giving people a look at what, as we started to break down the demographics of East Long Meadow, what actually are our demographics. And these actually come from a couple of years ago, where you're looking on the left-hand side of our student population, and we're seeing that 79% of our student population identified as white, where 21% of our student population identified as non-white. And that's something that's been growing in terms of the percentage identifying as non-white throughout my tenure here as superintendent. And then looking on the right, you see that educators in the East Long Meadow Public Schools are 94% identifying as white and 6% identifying as non-white. And so that's something certainly that we want to be very cognizant of as we look to hire, recruit, and continue to build our staff with incredible people, because students are looking at the educators around them, and certainly they want to be seeing a staff that represents and understands the context from where they're coming. And that's something that not only we've been discussing with the district steering committee, but also with this subcommittee, and then subsequent conversations with, say, the leadership team and other vested parties. Just to give you a quick update, these were numbers that were taken 2 years ago. Now, if you were to look at our district profile, we actually are, if you can go back, Ms. Brown, just to the previous one. If you were to look at, and this is on the DESE's website, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, under district profiles, we are now 77% of our students identifying as white, 23% identifying as non-white, and one of the populations that's not represented in here, or demographic anyway, that's not represented in here, is that we have students, roughly 36.2% of our students fall into a category which Dr. Allen's going to explain in a little bit with another slide, fall into a category of high needs. And so our diversity is coming in a number of different demographics, and these are things that we need to be much more cognizant of, and as Mr. Polk and Mr. Ficero said, discussing more frequently on a daily basis, really, throughout the district.
Hi, everybody. Good to see everybody. This is Timothy Allen, he, him, his. So to Gordon's point, this next slide just shows you some more of the demographics. In 2019, as Gordon pointed out, where 1.6% of our students were English language learners, 7.5% of our students came from a home where English is not the first language, and then 1.7% of our students are students of color from the METCO program. Ms. Brown, if you could go to the next slide, and this is what Gordon was alluding to, which 18.8% of our students have disabilities. Almost 34% of our students are designated high needs. What high needs, how the state designates that is, it's in all the students in a school or district belonging to at least one of the following individual subgroups: students with disabilities, English language learners, former English language students, or low income students. So if you're any of those things, it puts you into the high needs category. And then students who are economically disadvantaged in 2019 was at 18.7%. So again, to Gordon's point, we're rapidly diversifying in every single way. And so these are the numbers of 2019. In 2020, if you look at that 18.7% on the far right, we are now at 22.7%. So in 1 year, we've increased by 4% the percentage of our students who are economically disadvantaged. Our high needs students is up over 36% now, and our students with disabilities has actually gone down a little bit to 18.4%. So CLE and the audit that you'll be hearing all about tonight looks at diversity in many different ways. And I'm very happy to say here in East Longmeadow, we're a very diversifying population, and it's important that we're doing this work for many reasons, but especially for that one.
So thank you, Dr. Allen. As we then look as a district to not only develop, but change in order to make sure that our mission statement and our goals are focusing on all of our students and all of potential needs, we have to really take into account what our demographics are and how they are changing, and making sure that we are maintaining a focus on all of our students and understanding our students' needs. And I think we have taken the last few years a step forward, certainly with our look and focus on the whole child, as you see up in that first bullet point, and really all three goals for the district work within each other and continue sort of around that working circle, if you will. As we're focusing on the whole child, we want to make sure that the learning experiences we're providing throughout the district are not only engaging our students, but are also providing the opportunity for all of our students to access not only all of the curriculum, but then develop 21st century learning skills that allow them to move on as they go through the grades, pre-K to 12 in these Long Meadow Public Schools, move on and be productive members of society. And so it really then becomes a situation each year as we look at these goals, not only to possibly revise the goals themselves, but also be very careful in terms of how we develop the action steps to achieve these goals for all of our students, and make sure that we're always focusing on all of our students and trying to understand the needs that all of our students may have.
Heather, you're on mute.
There we go. Thank you. My name is Heather Brown, and I'm the Director of Curriculum, not Technology. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. And as Mr. Smith said, you know, the purpose of the equity really is to see what we need to do to make sure we can provide the goals that he just listed out for all students. And so when we met with CLE, it was very much a collaborative process. The audit wasn't done to us, it was facilitated with us, and they helped us build the capacity to continue to do this work. We met with them 4 times for 2-hour sessions. The first session, we analyzed data to really uncover critical areas of inequity. So we looked at quantitative data like MCAS, PSAT, SAT, AP, college completion data. And we also looked at qualitative data, like DESE has a vocal school climate survey that the students take after the MCAS. And we also looked at the results from CLE's Learning Community Survey. That's a survey that they developed that we gave to all of our staff that looks for things like perceived shared leadership and other practices that are tied to improve student learning and increased equity. At our second meeting, we looked at the root cause analysis because it's really important before we jump to creating solutions that we understand the causes. And then we looked at the reasons for the underlying reasons for inequities and determined the highest leverage barriers. So basically things that we could change without a whole lot of effort at first that would have big impacts. And just a little bit more about the learning survey. So the findings, first of all, the survey used a Likert scale. So the 4 would be strongly agree and down to 1 would be strongly disagree. And so these survey items here are really averages, with 1 being the lowest and 4 being the highest. And so participants' perceptions of building capacity to teach had the highest average responses, whereas building capacity to lead and reorganizing systems had the lowest averages. For building capacity to teach, teachers felt like the district really supports them in taking risks and trying new approaches. And that is not surprising considering all of the amazing things that have happened during teaching in a pandemic. In terms of building capacity to lead, teachers and staff felt like they didn't feel prepared to address adults who are not upholding norms. So for example, if a colleague was using deficit-based language about a student, folks didn't feel at this point ready to challenge that. And in terms of reorganizing systems, staff didn't feel like they had a voice in prioritizing the school's actions and making sure that students' needs are met. But this is something like many of the recommendations that we'll talk about later that we've already begun addressing, and for this particular one through our MTSS work.
Okay, so I'm Frank Page, he, him, his, and I will be going through the data from the focus groups and the interviews that were conducted with students and parents across the district. Now, what you see in front of you here is the data from those focus groups and those interviews. And what you're looking at is the number of times that the various identified codes were mentioned during the empathy and focus group interviews. So every time one of those got mentioned during the interview process, it was marked and flagged. From what you're looking at here, there are 8 different topics that emerged throughout the process of those focus groups. Within those 8, there were 4 themes that emerged that the excuse me, the group felt as a whole needed to be focused on in order to take the steps that we're looking to take. And those 4 themes that emerged were the access to programming, inclusiveness, the student-teacher relationships, and the educator capacity. So those are going to be the 4 things that we're going to be talking about as we go forward, and the areas where we identify opportunities for us to grow, as Mr. Polk alluded to earlier. There were 2 topics that came up with all 3 focus groups, and those are the 2 topics that you see have the little asterisk next to them. The first one being inclusiveness, and the second one being educator capacity. Those were mentioned by all 3 focus groups when they were having those interviews.
Hi, I'm Elaine Santinello. I'm the principal at Mountain View. My pronouns are she and her. Mr. Page just enumerated the emerging themes on the previous slide, and the 4 prominent themes are highlighted right here for you. The first one being educator capacity, and specifically social emotional learning and teacher-student relationships were highlighted. The next theme is inclusiveness. This is focusing on diverse representation and anti-racist training. Theme 3 is access to programs versus outcomes. And here we need to pay attention to a review of requirements and advanced placement participation. Theme 4, student-teacher relationships, specifically classroom awareness and an appreciation for identity. These emerging themes on this screen right here rose as incredibly interconnected opportunities, providing us with the foundation to advance our district's mission and goals. You will now hear in greater detail what these themes mean and how we can put the action behind them. And I will hand it over to Mr. Polk.
Hello. Can you all hear me? Yes, okay. So I apologize for not having my camera on. That certainly was not intentional. I was getting oriented to the Zoom setup here. But I'm going to discuss with you theme 1, educator capacity. As Elaine and Frank had alluded to, there were overall 8 topics and codes, but there were four themes that were the most robust in the discussions and the focus groups and the interviews. And so what each of us will do is we'll share some takeaways from the report with each of these themes and give you some ideas of opportunities that we think can come from the information in this report. So with educator capacity, right, student-teacher relationships and social emotional learning is really at the core of all of this work. I think we all could agree with that. And so therefore, it was really no surprise that this was one of the most robust themes that surfaced. It seemed to matter almost equally to all 3 constituencies that were interviewed, that included educators, families, and students. And according to the report, there were many students and families who expressed satisfaction in the support for their children that their children received in various capacities. But however, there were many students and families that expressed concerns. And that is not unusual when you do a comprehensive audit like this, or such as this. So some of those concerns really focused or surrounded concerns that had to do with the overall capacity to understand and support diversity. Just to give you a couple of examples of some excerpts that were in the report. So one East Long Meadow Public School parent was quoted as stating this: "I just wish there was a little more education on how to support kids or students with gender identity issues or concerns." This is a quote from a parent, because that is something that we are frustrated with. So in the interviews, this was a specific quote from an East Long Meadow Public School parent. Educators were generally reflective when it came to this theme. This is a statement from the report regarding educators, or from educators. When educators themselves discuss their capacity to support each and every student, many educators expressed that they thought this was an area where educators have shown improvements, and we certainly have been doing a lot in the last couple of years, a lot more, I should say, a lot more than we had before. And we have shown areas of improvement, yet educators also acknowledge that there is so much more work to do, and we certainly need more growth. So that was a statement from educators in the report. It's also important for us to think about our SMART goals. The school committee developed SMART goals. Then we have building specific SMART goals tied into our district goals. And when you think about our SMART goals, the district SMART goal regarding safe and nurturing, respectful learning and working environments, ELPS, will support teachers in creating that environment. When you look at East Long Meadow High School, for example, our specific SMART goal, East Long Meadow High School teachers will support students through 21st century learning experiences and creating an inclusive learning environment rooted in universal design for learning and culturally responsive teaching. So all of this really kind of comes together when you tie in our district goals to begin with. Some takeaways or opportunities that we would like to see moving forward. We'd like to continue to build educator capacity to offer choice in learning, implement differentiated instruction, support our students with disabilities, provide social emotional support, develop and implement culturally and linguistically responsive pedagogy. We would really like to continue to build educator capacity to create and maintain safe spaces for our students who identify as LGBTQIA+. We would like to create and maintain identity safe spaces for all marginalized students. We would like to develop and understand, or continue to build educator capacity to develop and understand the intersectionality of multiple layers of marginalization. We want to continue to build educator capacity to develop anti-racist, anti-bias curriculum, pedagogy, policies, and practices. We want to continue to support equity, justice, diversity, and inclusion. We want to continue to support educator capacity to understand the effects of implicit bias, how it manifests, and how to interrupt it or disrupt it. And we want to help continue to build educator capacity to recognize microaggressions and understand their impacts and support strategies to help students and staff to be able to disrupt microaggressions when they happen, to help build safe spaces. So those are just some of the opportunities that came out of this specific theme, educator capacity. Looking at the report, these are opportunities that we could take to improve in this area. So we will move on to theme 2.
Hi everyone, I'm Abby Steiner. My pronouns are she and her. I'm an English as a second language teacher at Meadowbrook School, but I'm here representing English language learners across the district in pre-K through 12. It's nice to be here this evening. I'm here to talk about, as we had said, inclusiveness with the sub-themes of a diverse representation in anti-racist training. I would like to start with that inclusivity was a topic of high relevance, and the importance to students was very apparent in how many occurrences it was mentioned in the focus groups. There were direct quotes from students that listed things that they wanted less pressure to conform. They wanted everyone to feel respected and comfortable. Overall, they expressed a desire for a system that includes follow-through when breakdowns occur. And they wanted to broaden the opportunities for students and families to feel included. As part of this committee, we reviewed these student requests, and all the stakeholders, families, students, and educators expressed the same desire to have equal access to the full range of all that East Longmeadow offers. It's been said, and I'm going to say it again, that we noticed as we were reviewing the report that there's an intersectionality to the different themes. So as much as we may sound as if we're repeating, the relevance was there in all of the 4 themes. So for example, the East Longmeadow SMART goals for creating a safe and nurturing, respectful learning and working environment once again hold true to theme 2, inclusiveness. And as Mr. Polk said, the East Longmeadow teachers working to support, to provide students through the 21st century learning experiences once again can be seen in the theme of inclusiveness. On the committee, we also identified opportunities for inclusiveness, so I'd like to present them now. I have 9 different opportunities. The first opportunity was for mandatory training for culturally responsive teaching, but also practices and interactions to set a direction for a safer and more inclusive culture by providing district-wide mandatory training. We'd like to amplify student voices, to set the direction to implement critical conversations and train students to have critical conversations, to amplify their voices. We'd like to recognize the opportunity for the universal design for learning to meet the needs of each individual learner. We recognize the opportunity for collaborative use of data to identify the focal groups and center their voices, their strengths, and their needs. There's an opportunity also to utilize practical measures to evaluate access to programming, such as looking at how are economically disadvantaged students and students of color, how are they proficient in the 4th and 5th and 6th grade math? How many students are able to take algebra in 8th grade? Practical conversations that look at these very thoughtful questions. There's an opportunity to document disciplinary referrals, have a system to document them, analyze the trends, who's being referred for which infraction, the time of day, and who's referring these students. There's an opportunity for regular assessment of how many students are not meeting academic milestones. We'd like to create a system for student feedback and finally, have a regular forum to update stakeholders on the district and school goals and progress by the affinity groups. Thank you. Now we'll progress on to theme 3.
Hello, everyone. My name is Millie Tangrady. I'm the Spanish teacher, one of the Spanish teachers at the high school. My pronouns are she and her. Some of the information presented in the audit showed that in the middle school, specials are available to all students. However, both teachers and students agreed that access to AP courses in the high school are available to everyone, yet not equitable, since most of the students taking these AP classes are white students. In the younger grades, there's a disparity in the field trip participation due to social economic issues, or in the cases where the ELL students are not comfortable participating because of the language barrier. Students mentioned that individuals should be encouraged to take honors and AP courses by teachers and not be discouraged because of where they are from. Students also felt that sports participation is inequitable to students who do not live in East Longmeadow because of the lack of transportation. Now Mr. Page is going to touch upon some of the recommendations. Thank you.
All right, so just to hit on a few of the opportunities that we identified in terms of opportunities to access, increasing both access to programs and also, as a result, increasing the outcomes of those programs. We identified a number of them. First one is the elimination of tracking practices for classes when we're talking about the levels that kids sign up for those classes and the classes they take in progression from there. Analysis of how middle school students are counseled into honors and AP courses in preparation for going into high school. Another opportunity identified was training our counselors on mindsets and how to use the College Board data that's presented to them. Encouraging all learners to try new classes across the board. Another opportunity was the increasing of AP enrollment in the persistence by subgroups and to provide equitable access to those programs. Complete a root cause analysis assessment to evaluate reasons and barriers for low enrollment and persistence in some of our AP courses. And our last opportunity we identified was to increase equity and access in both sports and other extracurricular activities as much as possible.
And that brings us to our final theme, which is student-teacher relationships. My name is Erin Teig. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I teach 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade music at Maple Shade, and also at, I teach 5th grade music at Mountain View. So both students and families mentioned that positive student-teacher relationships are a critical component in ensuring student success. And this fits with our ELPS SMART goal, and at ELPS will support teachers in creating a safe, nurturing, and respectful learning and working environment. And opportunities that was identified in this theme was for educators to build a classroom awareness. And students and families in the audit mentioned that they want teachers to know and be aware that relationships and the interactions they have with students have a profound impact on their learning experiences. For example, an ELPS student stated in the audit, quote, "I had a teacher that we did not really see eye to eye. We did not get along very well. That was the basis of it. This teacher also became one of my coaches. So I was also with this teacher in athletics and in school, and we would get into arguments. I hated the class." So that shows that the relationships that students have with their teachers can impact their motivation and their capacity to succeed. Some families have already taken advantage of the opportunity to build classroom awareness, some families and educators. For example, an ELPS parent said that my child had the opportunity to meet with the principal and discuss concerns. The principal and my child arranged a plan. It was a huge undertaking and a lot of corrections needed to be made, but the principal heard my child. So ELPS would like to continue to support transformative experiences like the one I just mentioned by focusing on building and maintaining positive relationships with students throughout the school year, reflecting on factors that give rise to imbalances in school discipline, recognizing how disproportionate discipline may occur because of educators' racial biases, foster an environment of shared responsibility, seek alternatives to punitive discipline such as restorative justice practices, and use positive and productive language when interacting with students. The other opportunity that was identified in this theme was for educators to have an appreciation for identity. Many students in the audit mentioned wanting teachers to build an appreciation and awareness of who was in the room. For example, an ALPS student who is deaf said, "The teachers do not come up to me. Instead, they go to the interpreters. They're probably scared to talk to a deaf person." So that shows that the teacher may not understand a student identity, but also may not know how to interact with the student based on their identity. So our goal would be to build an appreciation for individuals based on their identity. And this is very important, like a ELPS parent mentioned, when kids see that their teachers understand them and can handle them, then they do not want to disappoint them and they're behaving for them. So creating a relationship with teachers is the most enjoyable part for my kids. They also had teachers that did not get them, and that is when they misbehave. So the appreciation for identity is an important opportunity for educators. And ELPS would like to help educators maintain and build this appreciation for identity by encouraging educators to cultivate a curiosity about their students as individuals in order to foster positive relationships, build and maintain strong relationships with families, maintain awareness and respect of individual identities in the classroom, understand and identify implicit bias, and create avenues for student voices to be heard in conversations about equity. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dina Weintraub Stafford. My pronouns are she, her. I am a parent and really grateful to be a part of this committee and speak with you this evening. At this point in the presentation, we'd like to offer a little bit of a summary, and that all compiled data aligned with the equity indicators as you see on the screen, but bringing it back to the emerging themes, including educator capacity, inclusiveness, access to programs versus outcomes, and student-teacher relationships. These are all the themes that we just heard on. And determined by the focus groups, these correlate directly with these equity indicators. For context, when thinking about research, is always important to ground it in such research. And so a total of the 29 indicators were rated across educator, as well as programmatic and systemic equity areas, and were framed around research-based practices led by scholars from the West Ed Center on School Turnaround and the Foundation Working Group. On the right, we can see the indicators for educator equity, including high quality teaching skills, meaning educators were skilled in their content delivery. Educators' equity consciousness, a focus on consistent inclusivity in the classroom, validating race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality, as well as staff development and retention. The focus being a need to dedicate funds and personnel to create structure, as well as secure buy-in from educators to actively participate. Depicted on the left are sub-themes for programmatic and systemic equity. So the first being set a tone for a safe, inclusive, a safe and inclusive culture, meaning a validation for and of the whole student. Acknowledging and appreciating all that diverse community offers. The second being staff recruitment and hiring process. Educator representation should mirror student representation as a base level expectation. This requires intentionally inclusive recruiting and hiring processes. And the third being programs and materials, so increasing visibility and accessibility of the programmatic offerings. And so on the next slide, we'd like to kind of figure out how we take it from here as you've heard these findings and this collected data. So at this point, of course, we've already reviewed the collected data. We've dug into the assessment and analysis. We've spent time interpreting and understanding the opportunities. And I really want to emphasize this point. We must remember that this is and will continue to be an iterative process and must include buy-in at all levels. So to summarize, the following areas that rose to the forefront of focus include expand educator capacity, create inclusive and accessible programs, improve teacher-student relationships, and ensure diverse voices and perspectives are included in planning phases to better meet unique needs of the whole student. It is important to remember the data examined reflects that inequities are apparent to access to programs. student discipline, and recruitment of diverse staff. The data also demonstrates that there is much room for growth in cultivating an inclusive culture that is culturally conscious, sensitive to underrepresented students and staff, and addresses all students' needs. As previously stated, the data collected includes experiences and perspectives of students, educators, and families. Of the findings, the indicators demonstrated that while ELPS is mostly at the initial stage or approaching implementation stage, the report also identified key strengths aligned with areas of growth. And of the utmost importance is the recognition and willingness to provoke this sustainable change. Through identifying district strengths, we can understand where the gaps may be, but more importantly, align with opportunities. You will now hear more about these strengths, the areas for growth, and recommendations as we move this work forward. Thank you.
Good evening. I am Hillary Coughlin. I work at Mountain View School as a third grade teacher. And East Meadow Public School is a district of strengths. So our overall student achievement, we outperform the state in math, English language arts, and science assessments in grades 3 through 10. Latino, IEP, economically disadvantaged, and English language learner student proficiencies are very close to their peers. The graduation rate of students is about 25% higher than that of the rest of the state of Massachusetts. So our other strength is to set the groundwork for an inclusive learning environment for students. And we aim to advise the district on responses to incidents of bias and harassment, assist in the development or improvement of processes to support all students, bolster a focus and effort on hiring a more diverse workforce for East Meadow Public Schools. Another strength is setting the groundwork for high and equitable outcomes for students. East Meadow Public School educators are aware of the need to improve instructional core practices, strengthen all educators' belief in students' unlimited potential. And finally, we have a strength in setting the groundwork for a transformative culture for educators. Teachers report that there is intentional time and place dedicated to working together. The groundwork has begun, as evidenced by educators engaged in relative training, the Equity Committee's ongoing work, and the work of this equity audit. These strengths helped us establish recommendations, and the following slides will cover them. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Yanira Cintron Cordova. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the library media specialist at Birchland Park Middle School. As a result of the collaborative work and analysis, the team identified these recommendations to improve programmatic equity. Core leadership practice, setting direction, and the area of need was inclusive culture and goal setting, and the recommendation was clearly defined goal and direction for a safer and inclusive culture. Work collaboratively using the data to identify focal groups. Next, practice is monitoring progress. The need is accountability, safety, and inclusive culture, and communication. The recommendation is use practical measures to evaluate access to programs, document disciplinary referrals, assess students that do not meet academic milestones, use surveys and communicate. The next practice is building capacity to teach. The need is high quality instruction The recommendation is increase teacher capacity around culturally responsive pedagogy. The next practice is building capacity to collaborate. The need is transformative learning for educators. And the recommendation is to improve and increase professional learning and collaboration time. Next practice is building capacity to lead. The area of need is cultural shift, and the recommendation is recruit educators and students to serve in leadership roles to improve equity. And finally, the next practice is reorganizing systems. The area of needs are diverse representation, educator accountability, inclusiveness and safety, access to programs. And the recommendations is to increase racial and ethnic diversity of staff and students. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Jen Faulkner. I'm at the high school and my pronouns are she, her. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the recommendations to improve teacher capacity. As you heard earlier, this was one of the key themes identified in the report by our students, our parents, and our educators. So many of these recommendations, that's why they focus around improved teacher capacity. The recommendations are set up by core leadership practice, and we've highlighted just a few of them. There are more in the report, but these are the key recommendations. So the first core leadership practice is setting direction and monitoring progress. And action steps that are recommended to do those two things are to provide culturally responsive training around high expectations and growth mindset, to provide educators opportunities to connect as part of students' communities so that educators get to know students as a whole child, which of course is one of our district SMART goals, as so many people have said tonight. And if you don't connect with a student's community, you, their teacher, don't really understand the whole child. The next recommendation is something that's already being implemented now by the ELPS, which is using Panorama Ed for student feedback surveys and teacher monitoring and addressing of the needs of different subgroups. So that's actually in progress already. And finally, to meet educators' professional needs around equity with learning plans, goals, and coaching. The next core leadership practice is building capacity to teach. And so action steps recommended here include incorporating district-wide social emotional pedagogy, again, tying back into our district SMART goals, training our educators and helping them implement constructivist pedagogy where students have a voice in setting curriculum and instruction, to increase our teacher capacity to use universal design for learning, culturally responsive teaching, to make and implement modifications and accommodations for students with diverse needs. And all of that should lead all of our students to be able to persist in AP and honors classes and to use focus groups more than is done right now in order to make sure that happens. And finally, in this category is to engage our students in relevant, culturally conscious curriculum, which again does tie back into our district SMART goals, of course. Under the core leadership practice of building capacity to collaborate, the action steps include creating, engaging with, and reflecting upon our community-wide norms, and increasing the capacity of educators to give and receive feedback around changing assumptions about students, because that was one of the areas identified earlier in the report as something that our educators are not yet comfortable doing. Around the core leadership practices of building capacity to lead and reorganizing systems, we would like to increase the capacity of our staff to collaborate and lead culturally responsive training, teaching, and equity work. So it's about more than just providing professional development, although that is of course part of it. It's really about supporting our staff to become leaders in this equity work, especially our staff who are people of color. And then to improve personalized onboarding support for our new educators of color with coaching, mentorship, and affinity groups once someone is hired. And again, this has to do with supporting the staff we have, increasing the diversity of our staff, since as you saw way back at the beginning of the presentation, our staff does not reflect the diversity of our students. And so these are steps aimed at increasing that reflection so that our staff looks more like our students.
Thank you, Jen. So when framing programmatic equity, we really want to just examine the quality of educational programming. As you see here, there are various things that we can do to look at to do that. We want to look at educational programs into which students are either placed or from which they're excluded. It's not unusual for any school system to see data that often suggests that there are significant variations in the quality among different programs within the same school, or even different student groups within the same school that are also typically, there are also typically systematic differences in access to programs. So, you know, you want to take a look at processes for identifying you know, students in certain programs, whether it's in special education programs. We want to look at, you know, the process for discipline within a school, and even awards and recognitions, and you know, how we recognize and reward appropriate behavior and representation for, say, honor roll example. Those are all things that we can look at. We want to concentrate on programmatic equity by examining the expectations of upholding inclusivity. We want to reevaluate our policies and practices. We want to examine academic course enrollment, or quote unquote advanced course enrollment. And again, as you've heard so many times tonight, staff recruitment and retention, diversifying our staff to be reflective of our students, and hiring people who are building this capacity and understanding equity and inclusion. So that's pretty much the framing of programmatic equity.
Thank you, Eddie. And then to look at the educator capacity recommendations in the same manner to kind of frame what's our key takeaways here. So the first is to look at the curriculum and to engage all of our students in relevant, culturally conscious curriculum, rigorous tasks. Again, the things we're doing as part of our ELPS SMART goals, but with an equity mindset. To improve our student-teacher relationships district-wide with a focus on social-emotional pedagogy, to standardize the use of Panorama, and which again, we've already introduced in the district. And finally, the key, increasing teacher capacity to effectively teach all students, including those with diverse needs, by using research-based strategies such as universal design for learning, culturally responsive or conscious practices, and having high expectations and growth mindset for all of our students. And so as a committee, after the report was compiled, we met together with CLE at the beginning of this school year, and we found 4 high leverage areas that we thought as a committee were the things to focus on first. And so those 4 areas were based on everything you've just heard about what our students need to be able to succeed. So those 4 areas are AP and honors course access and persistence, professional development, hiring, and restorative practices. And across the district, from the district leadership team and from this committee, those things are in progress. There's already been professional development. It was part of the start of this year when we had those 10 professional development days at the beginning of the year. One of the things that we looked at district-wide with our educators was anti-racism training. And there's also hiring is in progress. There's been work with a subcommittee, part of this committee. And the other 2 areas, restorative practice, that's another way of saying discipline, but to move beyond our sort of traditional punitive model of discipline into one that's more equity focused by using restorative justice practices.
Thank you, Jen. I think Mr. Polk and I are finishing off this presentation with this slide here. And certainly this is a lot of information to take in. We understand that, and certainly we want to set up future discussions, because this work is ongoing. And one of the nice things that you've heard throughout is that certainly East Longmeadow is a district of strengths and has had success, but we know that in order to continue to stay at a very high achieving level for our district, we have to make sure that we're constantly looking at how we're doing things and how we're supporting the students who currently are in front of us. And so that means taking a look at our goals and our values, and just making sure that now, as we increase our knowledge, that we're developing not only SMART goals, but also the action steps that help us get to those goals and achieve those goals, is that we're using the knowledge that we're finding through the equity audit, that we're using the data that we look at now on a weekly basis from Panorama, and that we're taking words that have been buzzwords, although we have been putting them into practice, but instead of just looking for places to include, that's the expectation from day one. And then as we do this, continuing to support all, because as we know, to use the cliche, it does take a village. And so we need to build the capacity of all involved to make sure that we continue to support our students and help them achieve their very highest levels of academic, social, and emotional success.
Very well said, Mr. Smith. I mean, I would only add that this has been a deeply reflective journey, and we're just at the beginnings of it. I keep reiterating that just sharing this report is just this very small step in that process. I'm very encouraged by a lot of the things that have been going on throughout our district. Individuals, groups taking initiative. There's been just an elevated consciousness and raising of awareness from people taking initiative on their own with others, and add that with the support of the district. And, you know, like Jen said earlier, the district has been leading anti-racist work and professional development. And so there's a lot of moving parts, and we're all on this continuum of equity. And I'm just encouraged that we're having these conversations. We've taken these steps to invest in this work. And, you know, I just look forward to continuing to be a part of this process. And I think we all want to continue this journey and make sure that we keep going here. And that's all I would add. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you to everyone who's helped put this presentation together, and certainly all the members of the district steering committee who, as Mr. Polk mentioned earlier in the presentation, set this in motion after we had students and individuals who had stepped forward and made sure that their voices were heard. And so we're incredibly thankful for them. I think at this point, we probably could stop sharing the screen and see if people had questions. But as I said before, we know that this is a lot of information, and it will, you know, we expect to have other conversations down the road.
Yeah, thank you, Gordon. Certainly on behalf of the school committee and the district, thank you all so very much for your efforts and time already put into this, to have students, educators, administrators, parents collectively working on this, certainly of the utmost importance. And you know, the themes that you brought up tonight, the areas of need, the action steps required, are all very sensical, actually, and we, you know, things we should be working on individually, but as a group. So again, thank you for all your work so far. Eddie, I wonder if you could just go a little further into universal design for learning. You used the term, a couple other folks did too. Just go a little further on that.
Right. So there are the steering committee, the district leadership team, I know, is doing quite a bit of work on universal design for learning, a model to approach educational practices in the classroom that just provide, you know, choice in learning, opportunities to remove barriers and obstacles that might, you know, prohibit engagement from students and access to learning for students. So I know it's a journey that the district leadership team has been on. that is now starting to, I would say, trickle down to the, well, I'll say trickle down, but certainly start to be built into our programming at the building level. And so we're at the beginning, at least at the high school, of beginning that professional development training. So I'm looking forward to more of it. And it sounds like kind of a ready-made model that fits right into this work that we're trying to focus on here. It kind of fits together. So it's a great opportunity.
Can I give an example?
Yeah, please.
So universal design came out of architecture. So the idea of, why build a ramp? Why not build a ramp that everyone can use for everyone to be able to access the building rather than think about it after the fact? And so one of the things that falls into the framework of universal design is providing audible books for kids. If the goal is not to have a student decode something, but just comprehend, then especially, at the higher ages, there's really no reason why someone couldn't listen to the book. So those kinds of things that we can build in for all students rather than just, in addition to obviously accommodations and modifications that other students might need, but things that all students can benefit from.
Great, thank you, Heather. Comments, questions from the committee?
I would just add that, I think one of the key pieces for any school committee, but obviously the one that we all seek to represent, the one here in East Long Meadow, is ensuring that we represent students. And I think if we're going to continue on a path where we are going to honestly represent students and their needs, then these are the types of reports that we need to sit up and take notice on. As I listen to the recommendations, I echo what Greg said in terms of them being practical and relevant. When you look at the field of education, one prominent name that comes to mind is John Hattie, and he really spent a lot of time speaking to what really works in education. There's a lot of people who speak to what they think works in education, but he's really taken the time to analyze all kinds of research studies to pinpoint what are those truly key actions that allow us and allow students to actually meet with success, that allow them to really reach their fullest potential. And so many of the recommendations put forth this evening and in the entirety of the report speak to like the top 10 of those recommendations. So from a perspective of the field of education, it seems really sound in terms of the recommendations that are put forth. And I, for one, am eager to continue to work to hear more about them and to think about ways that this committee can move forward in an actionable fashion to support the recommendations that we've heard just the beginnings of this evening. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Sarah. Anything else from the committee?
No, just very thoughtful, well put together, a lot of effort. I appreciate it.
What about action steps by the committee, the school committee specifically? I know, some of the things that were addressed were things that are actually happening already. What can we do to support both the educators and administrators, parents and students? Is there things specifically that we can do? I don't know if anybody wants to jump on that.
Sure, I think that some of it starts just very much similar to what Ms. Trulio said, is hearing more of these reports, getting into these discussions. To Mr. Polk's point on the final slide, it's a continuum. As we all get into these discussions, we move ourselves along individually first in understanding this work and trying to do our best in this work. And we want to move as many people through that continuum so that all of us can make progress and see growth. The other piece to this is obviously going to look at different things through a new, hopefully enlightened lens, such as budget development. As we go into the budget process, this is some of the knowledge that we should take into that, as we set the budget for each year. What are we doing for professional development? How are we supporting students and so forth? Those are just two pieces. We do have Mrs. Marjan Boucher on the steering committee, and so we always will have a presence of the school committee on the district steering committee, but we also want to bring more reports to the entire committee.
I would assume too that when we hear, oh, sorry, Greg, I was going to say that I would assume too when we start down that path of continuing to hear the district SMART goals, ensuring as a committee that what we're hearing tonight is reflected within the district SMART goals, so therefore it's becoming a living document within the actual schools. And then as we think about further negotiations with the educator contract and the paraprofessionals contract, that if these are part of the mission of the district, that then professional development opportunities are interwoven into those contracts so that educators are being given access to the types of professional development that this report is seeking that they actually have. So I think those are other opportunities where we as a committee actually have more capacity to influence and drive this work beyond just the budgetary ones.
And also, as we move forward, we can include these in our school committee goals as well, so that we're in a line, the whole district is aligned with everything that's going on.
Okay. Agreed. Very good points. Okay. If anyone has anything else, this would be the time. Otherwise, again, we are so grateful for the work you've done in terms of raising awareness for equity, and we're here in full support of your efforts, and we'll look forward to seeing you come back again. Mr. Ferraro, did you have something to say?
As we're coming to conclusion.
Or you're just saying goodbye?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Again, thank you all.
I know as we come to a conclusion, I just want to praise Heather, our leader and our facilitator, who really for 2 years was very instrumental in making this all happen. So a big thank you to Heather Brown.
Okay. Thank you, Rich. And thank you, Heather. Yeah. Okay, with that, again, thank you all so much for attending this evening and for all of this information. And we look forward to certainly speaking with all of you again.
Thank you.
Okay, have a good night. Okay, again, certainly very valuable work and a lot of good information from that. So thank you for all of that. Okay, we're going to move forward then with our update on East Long Meadow Public Schools learning model. Just to start off, I had mentioned earlier that we would talk about some of the questions that had come up before. Basically, in terms of the hybrid model, we continue as a school committee to believe that we should follow CDC guidelines. Currently, CDC guidelines are 6 feet social distancing. So we're going to continue with that until they say otherwise, which leads us to the hybrid model, at least for now. Certainly subject to change in the future, but for now, we're just going to stick with that 6 foot distance for CDC because we believe the science leads us to that. So I hope that answers that question. Mr. Smith, do you want to bring us up to date on some of the other points?
Sure. So really, this week and next week are 2 points of expansion. This week, we are expanding students who are riding and coming to school during their cohort week or in-person week, riding to school on our buses. And so one of the areas that we had expanded to, we looked at students in grades 7 through 12, because initially we were looking at students who were in grade 2 miles or further from the school they attend in grades K through 6. So we have expanded, and this week we are bringing in more students. Families have taken us up on that opportunity, and we'll look to see how that works with the routes that we've now expanded. So bus stop changes and so forth have changed this week, and we now have on a cohort A week, which would also include students in cohort D, roughly 322 students riding buses. In a cohort B week, which again also includes cohort D, we have 303 students riding our buses. And we'll probably see that increase as we look to our first expansion in terms of families who have asked to go from the C cohort, which is a predominantly, not even predominantly, is fully remote. And the students in C cohort are attending classes through the live streaming. And what we've done, if you remember a few school committees back, we talked about how can we set up a structure that will work for families and for the schools to make sure they plan and put the structures in place to allow for expansion of in-person learning in a safe way, predominantly looking at things like the 6-foot separation in classes. So we have the deadline of the 15th of the previous month. So in this case, it was February 15th. Families alerted us that they would like to have their children transition into the hybrid model and go into cohort A or cohort B and start to participate with more in-person learning. And so starting Monday next week, we'll increase our students in the hybrid model by 149 students. So that's 34 students at Meadowbrook, 10 students at Mapleshade, 19 students at Mountain View, 39 students at Birchland, and 47 students at the high school. And so not only will we be expanding students into in-person learning, we'll also be looking at of the 149, how many might take up the opportunity to use bus transportation. So those are the biggest updates, and it's something that over the vacation week, our administrators are working on. How do they set up new sections and make sure that they're putting all the safety protocols in place? Because any expansion that we do, we want to make sure that we can continue to keep students and staff and all in our buildings safe. And we've seen, similar to some of the points made in the presentation on the floating season for athletics, we're not seeing, and I think it's because of the mitigating and protective processes that we have in place, we're not seeing transmission in schools. We would like to continue that. We are seeing some quarantining, but the reason for quarantining isn't so far has not been a situation where we've seen some kind of transmission in schools and then we have multiple positive cases. Usually the quarantining is coming from someone who unfortunately has been exposed outside of the school district, does not know that, and ends up coming in to the school district or school building. And unfortunately, then you're into situations where you do have to take some precaution and quarantine.
Okay, any questions or concerns from the committee on the learning model update?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you found the kids that had started going hybrid, if they're continuing to, or if you saw, you know, some kids backing off, or are they still holding strong?
Most students who have started hybrid have continued. It was the sort of the reverse transition. Most of that situation took place at the upper grade levels, and that happened pretty quickly in the early part of, or later part of January, early part of February, where students opted back into C. We have not seen that type of transition at the younger grade levels.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Older kids got to get back in though. It'd be nice.
We encourage all students if we can do it safely.
Well, yes, obviously, yes.
Yeah.
Sarah, did you have something?
Yeah, I had a couple questions, a couple follow-up points. Greg, I totally understand what you're saying about the 6 feet piece, and I was less than pleased when I saw the CDC's guidance come out after they were planning to make some adjustments, to not see that it was coming out more strongly in favor of the 3 feet recommendation. But I think at some point we have to work as a committee to consult with whether it's our local healthcare professionals again, or maybe individuals from our local hospitals who specialize in infection control, to talk about how we can possibly work around the 6 feet indicator. The CDC right now is one of the few bodies, which I'm not discrediting the CDC by any means, who's holding true to 6 feet. You know, the Department of Ed is pushing for 3 feet, and so are other agencies. So I think we need to continue to engage in a conversation around 6 versus 3. I just think it's really tough for families, and it's tough for even myself as a committee member to grapple with the 6 versus 3 feet piece. And I think it's something we need to continue to revisit, not only for the remainder of this year, but even going into next academic year. It just seems like it's another point. I don't know if others on the committee have thoughts on that, but that was one question that I had.
I do find it frustrating because you're getting so many conflicting suggestions from all different walks of life. And, you know, I know when I'm working that we're frequently closer than we're at that 3 foot point when we're in circle time. And as much as you don't, they wiggle, they move, and I don't feel that they are necessarily unsafe. Of course, we readjust children as we must, but I'd like to hear more of it. That said, though, I don't know if I necessarily trust like what the Department of Ed's saying, or because they flip-flop the whole time too. It's really, I don't know. I guess I just like to hear somebody who knows what they're talking about talk.
Do we know if any other districts have tried this? Any other school systems at 3 feet?
There are districts in the Commonwealth that have adjusted to 3 feet. In the Lower Pioneer Valley, the 7 districts that we're associated with, we're all right now at classrooms with 6 feet. And even in the DESE guidelines, the 6 feet becomes paramount as you're taking mass breaks or eating. And so those are some of the things that can be more challenging depending on how you set up your classrooms, you know, if you have to go from 3 to 6. So
and maybe, sorry, I'll say maybe it's something that we can explore though as we continue to see warmer weather, and we might be able to utilize some additional outdoor spaces to support with lunch and mask breaks and things of that nature. But in terms of being able to think about ways that we might be able to utilize the remainder of this year to help set us up for success for next year, since we don't have recommendations from DESE yet for the 2021-2022 academic year. It also feels like this is our time to start to plan ahead of them, because if we don't, then we're not going to be in a great place going into next academic year. We really need to capitalize on the structures we've started to put in place now to help set us up to be in a really strong position for our schools to kind of have a sense of what we're looking for and what we're aiming to accomplish when we hit the beginning of the next academic year. Because if we don't start that planning now in these next couple months, then we're not going to give the administrators and the teachers who need to then act on those recommendations time. So I just think it's something we have to think about, especially with the warmer weather on the horizon, ways that we might be able to take advantage of that, and to maybe try some situations where we are bringing kids into closer proximity potentially. Because if not, then we're not going to know how we might be able to start the next academic year if we don't get different guidance from the state.
I kind of almost think that we need to focus on the lunchtime period, because how do we make more space in the school? Like I see how they're doing it at the high school where, you know, they're using one of the gymnasiums and they're breaking the kids down, and I see that works. And I can see doing 3 feet in a classroom with masks on, but in fairness to the teachers and the other students, it is scary when the kids are taking their masks off. And so maybe if we were going to pinpoint one thing, you know, trying to strategize on how can we do maybe the lunches, where if we do go to that 3 feet period, we don't want the kids necessarily that close when they're eating. So maybe pick one thing that we could do well.
I agree with everything that's being said, but and to Sarah's point, I think we should probably be looking at if we can use outdoor spaces before we kind of try and monkey around with all the classrooms, especially as we continue to get later and later into the year. And then again, to Sarah's point, plan for next year. so we're ready to hit the ground running in September and not trying to fumble our way through it in August. So and then cautiously optimistic that the numbers are going to continue to get better as the warmer weather gets closer, and a lot of this other stuff will just go away naturally, hopefully. That all gets tied into the vaccines and all that other stuff. So, we just kind of got to be cautiously optimistic, I guess.
So my thought is, though, the CDC will have to address the 6-foot distancing issue, because logistically most districts can't make that requirement fit. So if it's vaccines that gets us there, or if it's data that gets us there, I feel that there's pressure on the CDC to find or to understand the science as best they can, to give recommendations, and for them to just have come out with new guidelines for opening schools and specifically state that 6 feet of social distancing is their recommendation. I just think it's difficult to go against that. I'm certainly open to get as many students in the district as possible into the buildings, but as we continue to go forward, and we've, as Mr. Smith alluded to or actually spoke about, we're increasing the numbers of in-person learners as we go. We'll have another group coming back potentially in April, and we're already in some cases, some of the lower levels reaching capacity in a hybrid model. And I know that's at 6 feet, but if you were to say now go to 3, but bring them all back, you're again close to capacity, and potentially excluding an opportunity for some of those students who are now learning fully remote from coming back based on not having room for them. So I'm certainly open for the discussion. I would certainly err on the side of caution for this. Perhaps maybe I make the recommendation that we wait for the March 15 numbers in terms of those that will be returning April 1. Potentially visit some of the classrooms again, Gordon, and maybe look at the logistics of the desks, and certainly I'd be willing to do that again. And then maybe after that March 15th number in terms of classroom size, we could readdress for a potential April-May change, potentially. That sound like the plan?
Yeah, I think to your point though, Greg, the same way that I think it was Beth who brought it up regarding, DESE and their kind of contradictory messages. The CDC at the same time is providing those same contradictory messages to us too. I mean, at one hand, they're saying they're recommending 6 feet, but they're saying schools should be the first to open and the last to close. So you're setting up a dichotomy by which you're making a statement that you want schools open, yet you're making it very restrictive by which to do so. So I think it's that same type of situation where we need to continue to look at multiple perspectives and multiple viewpoints to ensure that we are making the best decision, because it's going to continue to get tougher as the longer that this continues. The tougher it's going to be to keep kids out of the building. And if we don't start to think about those different viewpoints and those different perspectives on 6 versus 3, then we're going to keep going in circles. And I don't think that's what anybody on this committee, nor do I think it's what anybody in the general community wants to see for the kids. So I just think that we need to start to think broadly about this and maybe bring in some additional perspectives so that we're able to make a really informed decision. And like I said, potentially capitalize on the remainder of this year to help set us up to meet with success at the launch of the next academic year.
And I completely agree with that, Sarah, in terms of an eye on on the fall. We certainly have to get to that soon. Also, we'll have our health professionals back again next meeting, hopefully. And I think this is a discussion point that we can bring up and have them prepared to discuss. I know when we first decided, we brought in data and recommendations from DPH, CDC, DESE, and certainly we can pull that all together again for a future discussion so we can get as many points of input as possible. And I know everyone's concern at this table is pure and honest and trying to get these kids back, and so let's all continue to work on that. I agree with that. So let's look at the numbers for the March 15th, and we'll pull that other data together. And if we're able to do it then we're going to do it, because I believe we've done right by our students and families so far, and staff. And let's keep working in that direction.
Just one other point. I don't even know if I necessarily want to make, say for instance, like keep it maybe in my mind, maybe keep it the way it is in the hybrid mode and the way it is, but let's think like we have all the kids in there. So as we're planning, all right, can we fit all the kids in there? But think beyond that. So maybe we switch out how we do the lunch situation in hybrid, but thinking like everybody's there. So we're not maybe messing up our schedule as we're trying to rethink how are we going to do lunch next year if there's still some quasi sort of rules there. You know, they might get rid of the 6 feet and make it 3 feet, but they might want the kids further apart at lunch. So we don't know. And so I guess that's what I'm thinking, like just kind of, even if like, how would we tweak it without necessarily bringing all the kids in, but knowing that, hey, we're going to be good come the fall too. Because it could be tough because we don't, you know, we don't want to go against what the state necessarily wants us to do, but at the same time, like you're saying, it's a wait and see with what the health professionals have to say too. So, but that was my thought process. Let's think like, how will we do this when the time comes? Practice with the kids in a hybrid model, maybe in May, if we feel like, okay, let's practice this for lunch and that for lunch, and how do we fit them all in, even if they're not all there. But at least we've thought about, okay, this kid's here, that empty seat, the next kid will be there in the fall. And I guess that's how I'm thinking it through.
I'd also like to see when teachers get vaccinated too. I'm hoping that it's soon.
Do we have a sense of how many of our educators are going to opt into the vaccine?
We don't. We haven't taken a survey of that yet, but that's something we certainly can do.
Okay. And then the other question I had was, you know, we've been talking about data this evening, but also our students just completed their second round of diagnostic testing. So it would be interesting now that we'll have had the data points from the initial diagnostic to the mid-year from this academic year, as opposed to the initial diagnostic from last year to the mid-year diagnostic. So I think that was something that the committee should continue to look at, because not only do we need to be concerned, obviously, about the health of our students and the health of our educators, but we also need to be keeping a close eye on how are they achieving academically. And we need to make sure that we're making decisions based on meeting their needs in terms of academics as well. So I think that that will be another good data point as we continue to move forward, now that that second round has completed, that we should be looking at in terms of where are we this year, where are we last year. And since iReady is such a large company, being able to think about how are we comparing to the national data that they have as well.
Yes, and our hope is to bring you that data at the March 8th meeting. Okay. What we were looking to do is, the hope would be that, you know, we weren't battling a global pandemic, but, you know, so we could have presented the equity audit back in September and kind of build all of this as we go forth in the school year. But we are certainly seeing a lot of creativity and great initiative as we have sort of met the challenges of the pandemic. And so now we'll start bringing this data and combine it with some of the things that we know from the equity audit as we build our goals going forward.
Okay, any other points to this discussion?
I had one more question. Sorry.
Go ahead, sir. Yeah,
I got
please.
some
No.
questions. I got some questions based on individuals seeing some of the updated DESE guidance, especially around the transportation models and pool testing. So I didn't know if Mr. Smith could speak to those, just so that the general community kind of has a sense around what pool testing is, reasons why we might not be considering it here in town, and then also how DESE's guidance around transportation has shifted, and how just how that continues to be an interesting conversation in terms of the state's recommendations to school districts.
Sure. So we did attend a webinar on pool testing, and basically what that is it's looking at coming through, swabbing, say, a full classroom, all going into one test vial, if you will, if I'm understanding that correctly. And then as that gets processed in a lab, it gives you a baseline if all of that comes back negative of sort of where your community is. The challenging part that we found and our nurses found is that as we were going through the webinar, we realized that DESE will set you up with this, but then you have to, as a district, staff it, run it, and pay for it. And so you're talking $5 a swab, if I'm remembering my notes correctly. You're talking a need of more than just our 5 building nurses to make this happen. And after you do this testing, you still have to, if you start to get positives, you don't know where the positive is. So now you're still looking for PCR testing, which has been the sort of the
gold standard.
Thank you, gold standard. I was going to say benchmark, but gold standard better. So that's something that right now I know that our nursing staff was not really in favor of taking on. It seemed to be a quick handoff. It also seemed to be a way for DESE to couple with the Binax testing as well, which is more looking for the antigens. And again, not necessarily the most reliable. Any of these tests, as far as I'm understanding it, just prompt you then to need a PCR test in order to make sure that the individual is hopefully negative and we can move on with learning. So
Gordon, if I could just jump in on that too, on the pool testing, in reading on it, the results of any of those tests are a week lag time. So as we all know, in COVID, that's an eternity. So I don't personally see the value of the pool test for us as a district in terms of trying to identify cases of COVID, right? Because if it's a week later, yes, it's good in terms of data and how much infection is within the building, but it doesn't help us contact trace or prevent it. So that coupled with, we're already asking all our students and staff to wear masks all day, to now ask that we're going to swab every single student and not get results for a week just didn't seem to make a lot of sense. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me, at least at this point.
I don't disagree. I just think it's important for the community as they continue to hear about these initiatives coming forward from DESE and different press releases and different news venues, that they're understanding that we are talking about them and making considerations, but that there's rationales behind why we might not be opting into something such as pool testing, rather than leaving that narrative to be told by local news agencies or press releases, because those conversations, I think we owe it to people to let them hear us, hear our thought process behind why we might not opt into something like pool testing.
And I don't know if I necessarily be crazy having my kid getting tested. I'm like, that's a personal, obviously that's a tough thing to get a parent to sign off on, or easy, depending on the people.
And I think in addition to not only our internal discussions as a district, we also did discuss it across the LPVC, and I don't think any of the districts within the LPVC are doing the pool testing for many of the same reasons that we just discussed.
And then the transportation, Gordon?
Sorry about that. Yep, transportation. So right before the February break, DESE did release new transportation guidelines, and they are creating a freer space, if you will, on the buses, and they're lifting the capacity. So we'll be working with the LPVC to look at that and make sure that they can implement it as we continue to expand options. One of the things that they're requiring is that you are keeping your windows, which we've been doing actually, open on the bus at least at 2 inches, keeping that ventilation. We've already, and the LPVC has been doing this, allow siblings obviously to sit together. They're going a step further and starting to look at letting other students start to sit together and lifting that capacity. We have an LPVC meeting tomorrow, and so I'm sure I'm going to hear more regarding how the LPVC might start to implement this and what it looks like, because there are a number of things in that guidance that were, I guess, for consideration, if you will. you know, what kind of protocol you're going to have at the bus stop, what protocols do you have on the bus, and what requirements. Masking obviously is still required for all of us at all times on the bus, unless there's a health situation that would certainly prohibit a person to mask. So we're going to continue to work with the LPVC as we expand, and we can take a look at how they're implementing and what they're doing, because obviously one of the things that we've needed and any district needs if you're doing contact tracing is a roster and a seating chart for the bus. We have seating charts obviously for our classes, but we've needed seating charts as we do contact tracing for the bus. And so those are going to change this week as we expand. They'll change again next week, I'm sure, as we expand further.
And then Gordon, has there been any mention during any of your meetings with either the commissioner or any other folks at DESE in terms of the state's decision for continuing to offer a remote only option as we move forward? Has that come up yet in terms of forward planning for next academic year?
Not for the next academic year, but
Okay.
it certainly is something that has been a consistent message that we have to have that option, at least this year. My guess would be, if we're going into another year, at least of masking and maybe other safety protocols, that we probably would have to have that option available as well.
Okay.
Okay. Good discussion on that update. And again, we'll have that on the agenda as we move forward next meeting. We're going to move forward with our next item of business. We have a donation from Grin & Barrett.
Greg, I have one more question. Sorry. I was waiting to see if
No, Sarah, you used them up. No, sorry.
So then,
Go
as we
ahead.
think
Go.
about our forward planning, does that, I mean, I think one of the things that happened when we were forward planning last time was we were the recipients of information as opposed to necessarily having what we've had in the past, which are sometimes like professional development sessions where we're able to meet freely with some of the members of the leadership team, whether it's principals, members of the district leadership team, to talk through plans in a more professional development type setting. So are those types of meetings something that we can work to set up between now and the end of this academic year, as opposed to, just our typical school committee meetings? Because I think like a balance of the two of those might help us be able to think creatively around satellite locations or how class lists are composed, so that we're not doing this on the very heels of closing one academic year and trying to launch one in what continues to be uncertain times.
Yeah, Sarah, I have some ideas on this as well. Would it be okay with you if we discuss this at our agenda meeting and we can come back with some ideas and proposals?
Yes, I just want to make sure that we can do these types of, have these types of conversations in the professional development type setting, so that then we're coming forward as a committee with the leadership team to have these discussions.
I'm game for workshop any old time.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, great. With that, let's move on now to the Birchland Park donation. Pam, is this you? Yeah.
Yes. Hello, everyone. In your package, you'll see that there is a request from the Birchland Park principal, Dr. Allen, for the school committee to accept a $500 check from Grin & Barrett, and this is for a sign-on bonus. Again, that's $500, and looking for school committee to approve that.
I move to
Okay.
accept the $500 donation from Grin & Barrett Enterprises to Birchland Park.
Motion made by Beth.
Second.
Second by Sarah. Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. That motion carries 5-0.
Great. Thank you. I'll get that deposited for you. Let me go right into the next one, Greg?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay.
Pam,
The next
please.
one, 5.2.2, is a request from the high school principal, Mr. Page, for the school committee to accept $187.63 from Ohio Pile Prints, which is from the sale of the Spiritware. And I would like to thank our local Big Y, Walgreens, Stop and Shop, and CVS for those sales. So again, that's $187.63 from Ohio Pile Prints.
Okay, a motion, please.
I move to accept the donation of $187.63 from Ohio Pile Prints for the high school gift fund.
Motion made by Bill,
Second.
second by Antonella. The discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. That carries 5-0 as well. And one more, Pam.
Great, thank you. I'll get that deposited for you. And the last one is what is called the FY 2021 State Coronavirus Prevention Fund Program that the state approved on January 7th. And this is $110,050 that is going to come in two level funds, one in February and one in April of equal amounts. And it needs to be expended by June 30th, 2021. This is for coronavirus, obviously, and we're planning to use this for technology upgrade for better suiting our remote learning model. So I'd like the school committee to please approve that grant.
Okay, do I have a motion to accept the grant, please?
I move to accept the state coronavirus prevention fund distribution. It was of $110,000.
110,050.
Okay, 110,050.
Thank you.
Yes.
Motion made by Beth,
I'll second.
seconded by Antonella. Pam, so we're going to work in conjunction with IT in terms of purchasing?
Yes,
and such?
always, yes. I'm in process right now waiting for quotes from Ryan, and we're partnering on that. He has some funds available. As you know, we're putting everything together forward, trying to get these the technology upgraded for our staff to help with the remote learning.
And Pam,
These are made to update existing technology that we have that's just outdated, and we're renewing it basically.
That's correct.
and that grant was targeted towards IT?
Not only towards.
Okay.
This was for, let me see, recipients, protective equipment, hygiene supplies, costs associated with socially distanced on-site learning, technology. So it's anything around the coronavirus.
But we were seeing, yes, but we were seeing the need because we have the other pieces kind of checked off already. That's our
correct.
next highest need, just in terms of like how we're just making the decisions in terms of expending those funds.
Yes, thank you very much for clarifying that and letting everyone know. So yes, the PPE, we're monitoring that situation. We have that up to par and everything's good with that. And again, we're working with the schools to make sure that we're on top of that. Most of that was funded with the CVRF grant. And now we're into the second ESSER grant. And this one here is the new grant, as I said, and this one here is perfect timing for the technology piece. Thank you.
Okay, motion being made and seconded. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion carries 5-0. Okay. So the last thing we have on our agenda is a discussion on our FY 2022 budget. Mr. Smith, you want to start us off on that?
Sure. So in your packet, you have an outline that's similar to what you saw in the last meeting in terms of where our current budget is, what we know, at least from the governor's budget, Chapter 70 will be for FY22. That's $12,175,958. That's only an increase of roughly 73,000 over FY21. And we're thinking that that increase basically is our increase due to the Student Opportunity Act starting to be funded over the next 7 years. But it is an increase, and certainly that's something that we want to make sure we're taking note of. Then Mrs. Blair broke out for you sort of what it may look like if we were to increase at 1%, 2%, 3%, and 4%. Prior to going into that percentage increase, we also never wanted to forget that last year's budget development became quite challenging as the town and the school district wrestled with what became this global pandemic. And so we did reduce positions at the high school, 2 positions, an assistant principal and an instructional technology specialist. At Birchland, a foreign language teacher and a literacy support teacher, and then a shared academic literacy coach at Maple Shade and Mountain View. And we certainly don't want to forget that. We do know that going into FY22, again, it is going to be somewhat unknown because we're not sure what challenges may remain as we move into FY22 regarding the global pandemic. But we also know that we're going to have certain challenges that we've referenced through different presentations tonight, whether they be academic learning gaps or situations around students that might need additional support with social, emotional, and mental health. These are things that actually we're seeing now, and certainly as Mrs. Trulio said, as we present some of the iReady data, it'll be interesting to look at what that looks like compared to our fall assessment and possibly even to last year's assessment. As we've had continued discussions with the leadership team, we are trying to be very thoughtful regarding the fact that we know it could be a challenging budget year, both for the district, the town, and the Commonwealth. So we started to look at and discuss this idea of looking at specific positions for next year. It doesn't mean necessarily giving up the positions that were lost forever. It just means starting to target where we think we're going to get the most impact putting together this FY22 budget. And so these aren't necessarily at the bottom of the page in any kind of prioritized order. It basically is just discussions going from high school Birchland to Maple Shade, Mountain View, and Meadowbrook. The first one takes a look at bringing back that assistant principal and having that become a position that actually looks and oversees oversees all of assessment that's going on at the high school and assists and coordinates all of the educational software that the high school is using. One of the things that we're starting to look at with the high school, and we've looked at it in years past, but it is a budget item, is do we use the PSAT as not only a assessment that can provide an incredible amount of information for our students as they move forward, but make it uniform? Because we have students who have always taken it, but we also, as we think through an equity lens, have students who may not have taken it because there is a cost associated with it. And so one of the things we were thinking as we looked at this position is also budgeting or looking at our development of the budget to start to have a universal PSAT where we schedule, because the College Board actually has developed a PSAT for grade 9 along with the more traditional PSAT, and have our 9th grade students take it, our 10th grade students take it, and possibly even our 11th grade students take it. As we look at how they're doing with that, it gives us information each year of how we can better support them. It also gives students, like anything else, as you continue to take something like the SAT, a standardized test, you get better at knowing how to take those exams. And we know that that becomes, when it becomes the SAT, it becomes somewhat of a high stakes assessment. So that position could be really valuable if we target it that way. It starts to pick up some of the things in the direction that we're going at the high school, and does not lose sight of the fact that we need to coordinate and provide a certain amount of guidance and leadership around educational software that we're using, in addition to assessment programs that we might start to develop. So that was the thought at the high school. Birchland, we are looking for next year, if possible, to bring back that foreign language teacher. Spanish basically is the only foreign language that's taught at Birchland, and reducing down to 2 positions basically makes it much more challenging for having our students, even in 7th and 8th grade, have somewhat of a consistent program. The foreign language schedule is tied to the specials. And so students in 7th and 8th grade may get it 3 times a week as they go forward, but it's not the type of consistent sort of building block that maybe our students would need if we really want to see more students, say, go on to Spanish Honors 2 as they hit 9th grade, or for that matter, just Spanish 2 as they hit 9th grade, because they may not really have the building block that they need.
And it goes
Really,
back
6th
to,
grade, even with 3 teachers, since it's tied to the specials and some of the needs that we schedule at 6th grade, it becomes somewhat of a wish or a hope that we can get them some exposure to Spanish. Certainly not this year with just 2 teachers. Sorry, Mrs. Boucher, you were
no,
about to
I'm
say.
sorry, I was interrupting you. It kind of even goes back to what, you know, the group today was talking about, where some of the kids just don't get the opportunity to do it because they haven't hit those benchmarks that put them at that point to get it. And then you've got parents that are frustrated, students that give up. And, you know, I hope that when we bring this to the town council, they understand that there are some things we can get rid of, but the teaching of the certain academics is unacceptable to lower it.
And so that's why we felt that certainly that's a position, even in a challenging year, we should be talking about for all the points that you made, and hopefully some of the bullet points that I provided. And then as you continue down that list, again, it's not a prioritized list at the moment. Maple Shade and Mountain View brought a very good point to these discussions that one, because they are 3 through 5 schools, they do share positions quite a bit, whether it be a literacy coach or so forth. And then 2, they don't have necessarily the same resources that some of the other buildings or all of the other buildings have. In most of our other buildings, we actually have a position of adjustment counselor. At Meadowbrook, we happen to have someone who's trained as an adjustment counselor who took the position as guidance counselor. And so we're utilizing really the adjustment counseling skills there. And we also have the ability of someone else we hired in the other position who has ABA training. And so we really have created a dynamic duo there. We don't have that same support system at Maple Shade and Mountain View, and we know that we're going to be dealing with increased support needed for our students socially and emotionally as they begin next year, no matter what the model may be. And so they're asking, they're not certainly saying that they don't want to revisit a literacy academic coach, but they feel an adjustment counselor would be really needed as we begin next year. And so they were interested in sharing that and having an adjustment counselor probably do either a week on and week off, you know, one at each school, or come up with a model where they can build up not only relationships, as we've talked about in other presentations, but build up a decent caseload in each building in terms of having the time, if it's a week on, to see students, see teachers, talk with families, and support. And so that's something that they've brought forward. Then finally, the Meadowbrook has put forward something that they put forward the last few years, and that's a preschool teacher. Looking at our numbers, generally we have 2 preschool teachers now. Each teaches 2 sections. It's a half-day program. So you really have 4 sections of preschool. And we also have 5, sometimes 6 paraprofessionals tied to the preschool as well. What happens generally in our preschool is we start with students that need the early intervention and have IEPs, and we need to put together programming for. What we've done, at least throughout my tenure, and I think prior to me coming here, is we've built a preschool where you have students that are receiving that support along with students who are peer partners, and you build classes where you'd like to have the ratio be 50-50 or maybe more along the peer partner percentage, just to provide that role model and programming and learning really between students of the same age. That's something that as we go through any academic year, and I know that this was a case that Meadowbrook had made last year as we discussed this at the similar time of year with the budget development, that as we get into, say, February, March, and April, we're still picking up students that turn 3 and are in need of this type of support programming and early intervention. And we're not necessarily able to provide peer partners because now your sections are going beyond, say, 12 students to 13 students and 14 students. And even if you could, and we generally do have a wait list at the beginning of the year of peer partners interested in joining our preschool, you don't necessarily want to take a 12 student class size and now make it 13, 14, or 15. That becomes somewhat counterproductive in a preschool model. So they were bringing forth adding a preschool teacher, which could be offset somewhat by the revenue you bring in through the peer partners, because we do charge a tuition for the students that are coming into the preschool. It certainly wouldn't pick up the entire new teacher, but it would offset. I don't know, Ms. Blair, if you have any idea how much it might offset based on previous years.
I'm thinking we could probably offset it by about 20,000, 20 to 25,000. Typically, we bring in about $30,000 in total for the peer role model students that come in. Of course, we're down that revenue this year, just as a reminder, because of our pandemic situation. And on that spreadsheet that's attached here with the amounts on there, the salary, I did not reduce that down at all because I'm not so certain what's going to happen next year. So I wasn't sure what the committee, was going to want to do in that case.
So as we look at those, we were trying to be very mindful of not, looking at sort of pie in the sky requests. We think that all of these positions not only are needed, but would support and move programs forward and students forward at each of the schools. If you were to ask me in terms of how you might prioritize, I think the adjustment counselor probably is one that I would move to the top of the list. It makes sense. It's going to support 2 schools who don't have that support now, where the other schools actually have that support already in place. And then it might be challenging as to which you might go with as the sort of the next most urgent pressing need.
Okay, so we had our discussion with the town council and the town manager last week to kind of move the process forward. We have the information in front of us tonight. I'd like to bring it back again in 2 weeks. Perhaps we could have some more detail on the comparative budgets this year versus next year, some of the contractual increases, both real and whatnot, and then have further discussion on additional positions that we might request. That's how we plan. Okay.
Yeah, because we have to have it submitted by March 15th, correct?
That's what we're shooting for. The council and the town manager made a date of their March 23rd meeting for submittals. So we would look for a town manager to submit our budget to the council on the 23rd. So yeah, that's our target date, Bill, was the 15th. So we have some work to do still. We'll have this meeting and then one more after that to hopefully hammer this out. Okay, great. All right, with that, if there's no other discussion tonight, we will call it an evening. It's been a long, productive evening. I want to thank everybody for their time tonight, and Mr. Mackey for recording via LCAT and coordinating the Zoom conference. And so with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion made by Bill.
I'll second.
Second by Beth. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, nay. That motion carries 5-0. We are adjourned. Want to thank everybody and good night.
All right, thank you very much.
Hey.